U.S. President Joe Biden landed in the Polish capital Warsaw on Monday, February 20, after making a surprise visit to Ukraine. Biden was greeted by a delegation that included Secretary of State, Marcin Przydacz, and U.S. Ambassador to Poland, Mark Brzezinski. Earlier in the day, Biden walked around Ukraine's capital Kyiv on an unannounced visit, promising to stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. The president flew overnight to the United States Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The plane was refueled and he flew on to Rzeszów in southeastern Poland. After a one-hour drive, he arrived in Przemysl, a city along the Poland-Ukraine border. Biden then boarded a train and traveled 10 hours to Kyiv. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Monday the U.S. told Moscow in advance that President Joe Biden was planning to visit Kyiv. The American leader had previously stated he would visit Poland, but not Ukraine. "We did notify the Russians that President Biden would be traveling to Kyiv," Sullivan said, adding that the message was sent hours before Biden departed Washington and was provided for deconfliction purposes. Sullivan did not indicate how Russian officials were contacted or how they responded to the information. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who is deputy chairman of the Security Council, confirmed via his Telegram channel that Biden had received safety guarantees from Moscow for his visit. In the same post, Medvedev referred to the U.S. president as an old man from across the ocean and called Washington's aid to Kyiv a way for NATO countries' military industries to profit. Andrei Bystritsky, the board chairman of the Foundation for the Development and Support of the Valdai Discussion Club, told TASS on Monday. Parallel visits by U.S. President Joe Biden to Ukraine and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Turkey are the United States' attempt to distract attention from Russian President Vladimir Putin's message to the Federal Assembly, due on Tuesday, February 21. Bystritsky said the visits were synchronized propaganda attacks ahead of the Russian leader's message. "We are witnessing a propaganda salvo from the West against Russia," he stressed. "It is an attempt to intercept the agenda." According to the analyst, in this way the U.S. leadership is trying to influence the domestic audience in anticipation of the upcoming U.S. presidential election next year. The election is drawing near. In the meantime, Biden has no special results to this credit. Success in Ukraine would give the Democrats a huge competitive edge in the next presidential election, he continued. Blinken's task is to overcome Turkey's resistance to Sweden and Finland joining NATO after the earthquake. The U.S. thinks Turkey will be more flexible. At the same time, Bystritsky stressed that the visits, organized by the U.S. leadership, will not change anything on the ground. Earlier, Biden, who arrived in Kyiv on an unannounced visit on Monday, promised additional military assistance to Ukraine. This is the first visit by the U.S. leader to Ukraine. Blinken, in turn, went on a parallel visit to Turkey, where he held talks with his Turkish counterpart Mevlut Cavusoglu. The two men discussed the outlook for Sweden and Finland's accession to NATO. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov recently said that President Vladimir Putin will give a speech on February 21 before the Parliament of the Russian Federation. The ceremony will take place at the Gostiny Dvor Center in Moscow. TASS quoted Peskov as saying that Putin's speech will guide domestic and foreign policy. These are the foundations on which strategic goals are formed. President Putin will also prioritize socio-economic development and ensure security for Russia. The speech was held according to the traditional ceremony. Peskov did not disclose further details of the speech. However, according to him, President Putin can emphasize the impact of the ongoing special military operation in Ukraine on the Russian economy and society. "The special military operation in Ukraine changed our lives in a different way and affected the situation in the whole of Europe," Peskov said. So President Putin will talk more on this issue. Many Russians are very eager to hear about the situation in Ukraine and the government's vision for how we can overcome sanctions and develop in the future. According to TASS, many politicians in the Russian lower house of parliament believe that the special military operation will be the main topic of the speech. The Kremlin spokesman did not mention which foreign guests attended Putin's speech. Typically, the ceremonies have previously been attended by lawmakers, senators, government members, senior cabinet officials, heads of the Prosecutor General's office and the Supreme Court, governors. Russian President Vladimir Putin may hold talks with Chinese State Councilor and Director of the CCP Central Foreign Affairs Office Wang Yi during the diplomat's visit to Moscow, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters Monday. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov on February 20 confirmed Wang Yi's trip to Moscow but did not provide a specific time. We do not rule out a meeting between Mr. Wang Yi and the Russian president. The agenda is clear and very extensive, so there is a lot to talk about. Commerson earlier reported that Wang Yi had arrived in Moscow, the final leg of his European tour. The main purpose of the trip is to enhance Beijing's role in the Ukrainian settlement. So far, Beijing has not officially commented on the information. As Wang Yi earlier said, China does not want to see the crisis in Ukraine drag on and expand, and is willing to work with the international community to prevent further escalation of the situation and achieve peace. The news that Mr. Wang Yi visited the Russian capital of Moscow was given in the context of the Ukraine conflict approaching a year, and the Washington side has repeatedly warned in the past few days about the possibility that China will supply weapons to Russia. Also reacting to this concern, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, "If Moscow gets support from Beijing, this will lead to world war." Zelensky told German daily Die Welt, "For us, it is important that China does not support the Russian Federation in this war. In fact, I would like it to be on our side. At the moment, however, I don't think it's possible. Because if China allies itself with Russia, there will be a world war, and I do think that China is aware of that." In an interview after the two met that Washington was concerned Beijing was considering supplying weapons to Moscow. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Saturday warned top Chinese diplomat Wang Yi of consequences should China provide material support to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield told Chinese and others to provide lethal support to the Russians in their brutal attack against Ukraine, that is unacceptable, that would be a red line, she said. Also related to Washington's statement that China is considering supplying weapons to Russia, Beijing recently denied it, saying, "It is the U.S., not China, that has been pouring weapons into the battlefield," the diplomat said at a regular press briefing on Monday. Unlike Washington, Beijing had been supporting talks for peace since the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, he added. The international community is fully aware who is calling for dialogue and striving for peace and who is fanning the flames and stoking confrontation. We urge the U.S. side to seriously reflect on the role it has played, do something to actually help de-escalate the situation and promote peace talks and stop deflecting the blame and spreading disinformation. Relations between Beijing and Washington have declined significantly since the U.S. shot down what it claimed to be a Chinese surveillance balloon, denied the allegations, insisting the balloon was a civilian craft mainly used for meteorological purposes. On February 21, Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang voiced his deep concern as the war in Ukraine continued to escalate and could spiral out of control. During a global security conference held in Beijing, Qin said, China will work with the international community to promote peace negotiations for Russia and Ukraine. China said it would make a proposal this week to find a political solution to the Ukraine crisis, just as it marked the one-year anniversary of the fighting. At the same time, Beijing will also prevent other countries from adding fuel to the war and stop blaming China, Qin added. The statement was made by Qin Gang after the U.S. publicly suspected China of providing weapons to Russia. Regarding the Taiwan Island issue, Mr. Qin said that other countries should stop judging by the so-called, "today is Ukraine, tomorrow is Taiwan." Earlier, at the Munich Security Conference, the head of the Office of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, Mr. Wang Yi expressed his opposition to the fighting over the nuclear facilities in China, Ukraine and the use of biological weapons. Not only China, Turkey, a NATO member state in recent years has also been entangled in accusations of helping the Russian military. Recently, Ankara responded. Speaking at a joint press conference with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Monday, Cavusoglu was asked to comment on Washington's concerns that Turkey could be exporting tech items to Russia in violation of Western sanctions. "If there is any violation, we will do everything necessary to prevent it," the diplomat asserted. Cavusoglu noted that, since the start of the Ukraine conflict, Turkey has taken a clear stance on hostilities and does not allow any warships to pass through the Bosphorus. Earlier this month, Reuters reported that the U.S. had warned Ankara that it could face punishment should it decide to export chemicals, microchips and other products to Russia that could potentially be used for military purposes, while Moscow and Ankara have recently seen an increase in bilateral trade. Since the start of Moscow's military operation in Ukraine in February 2022, Western countries have slapped unprecedented sanctions on Russia, banning among other things, the sale of sensitive technologies in an effort to cripple its economy. Turkey is opposed to Western restrictions against Russia but has said it will not allow them to be circumvented on its territory. Ron DeSantis, governor of the U.S. state of Florida and who is also expected by experts to be the opponent of former President Donald Trump in the race to the Moon House in 2024, called the Russian military a third-rate force, cannot pose a threat to NATO. On Fox and Friends, Mr. DeSantis said, "There's no fear about Russia's invasion of other countries' territories and other threats dwindling that hasn't even happened yet. Russia is presenting itself as a great power, but in reality it has suffered a lot in Ukraine." The Republican director also criticized President Joe Biden's approach to the war in Ukraine in the context of the U.S. leader's surprise expedition to the capital Kyiv on 2002. Last 02 Mr. DeSantis expressed disagreement when Mr. Biden gave more aid to President Zelensky. DeSantis said the Biden administration should define a strategic goal to achieve in Ukraine instead of providing financial support to Kyiv. The Florida governor insists the war in Ukraine would not have happened had President Biden not pulled out of Afghanistan by 2021. "I don't think the conflict in Eastern Europe would have happened if Biden hadn't shown his weakness during his tenure," he said. According to DeSantis, the U.S. should not get too involved in other issues in Ukraine such as helping Kyiv take back the Crimean Peninsula. Mr. DeSantis also warned of the danger coming from China. According to him, Washington needs to worry about dealing with China rather than Russia. Currently, Governor Ron DeSantis is traveling to many cities in the U.S. to promote the law enforcement program. He is considered a strong candidate who can face Donald Trump to represent the Republican Party in the race for the White House in 2024. Britain's King Charles visited Ukrainian soldiers undergoing military training in southern England on Monday, February 20, 2023. The King was heard asking about the soldiers' families as they underwent training by British and international soldiers. "I am amazed by the ability to meet His Majesty the King today," he talked to us, with genuine concern. "I feel like today is a great day." Britain has offered strong support to Ukraine since Russia's invasion nearly a year ago, including through the delivery of weapons and training of troops. Chief of Staff, General Patrick Sanders, saying, "We have trained over 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers. It's 10,000 for the first 6 months of last year. And we are looking to train a further 20,000 this year." Currently, Ukrainian soldiers are participating in a training course to operate Leopard 2 tanks in Germany. Reuters quoted a Ukrainian soldier at a training school as saying that Germany's main battle tanks are really very and hopefully they will create a turning point in the war against Russia. "We have been trained in the use of modern weapons," the soldier, who asked not to be named, told Reuters. "I hope they will help Ukraine win and end this war." When asked about the difference between the German Leopard 2 tank and the Soviet-era tanks in Ukraine, the soldier said, "You can imagine it like the difference between a Mercedes car and a Soviet Lada." The German Leopard 2 tank weighs 60 tons, has a 120 mm warhead and can target at a distance of 4 kilometers. Earlier, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba revealed that about 120 to 140 Leopard 2s will arrive in Ukraine for the first shipment. Hundreds of Ukrainian servicemen are currently in Germany to learn how to use the device before they arrive in Ukraine. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said he was impressed with the Ukrainian soldiers. "Ukrainian soldiers are very brave when they talk about the war at home, because they are people from the front lines," he told a news conference. They will return there after completing the training. On February 20, the UK government summoned Iran's Charge d'Affaires in London to protest about Tehran's threats against British journalists, after a Persian-speaking TV channel was forced to leave the UK for safety reasons. British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said in a statement that Iran's Charge d'Affaires, Mehdi Hosseini Matin, had been summoned to make clear that London will have zero tolerance for acts that threaten freedom of speech and the media. Earlier, an international Iranian-speaking TV channel in the UK was advised by the police to move the studio from London and switch to broadcasting from the US. The media outlet reported on the months-long wave of protests in Iran, and it said 2 of its reporters had received death threats if they continued to report. Secretary of State Cleverly said, "I oppose the threats from the Tehran government towards British reporters. I insist the British government will fight against countries that do not respect fundamental values and freedom of expression." Tensions on the Korean peninsula have increased since the Kim Jong-un regime conducted a record number of ballistic missile tests in 2022. In light of this situation, the leader of South Korea's ruling People's Power Party Chung Jin-suk announced that Seoul is considering developing nuclear weapons to counter the growing threat from North Korea. Chung was quoted by Yonhap news agency as saying, "We can develop nuclear weapons if recent responses to North Korea have not been enough." According to Chung, nuclear weapons will be part of the country's first strike-kill chain system. South Korea's chain of destruction military protocol is designed to counter threats from Pyongyang, which include preemptive strikes on nuclear weapons storage sites and the leadership in North Korea if detect signs of an impending nuclear attack. This program was created a decade ago. However, President Yoon Suk-yeol pushed the program harder. President Yoon has confirmed that South Korea will seek to develop nuclear weapons. This is the first time a South Korean leader has publicly mentioned possessing nuclear weapons since the Cold War. Mr. Yoon later said his speech was not an official Seoul plan. The U.S. ally did not support South Korea's ambitions, saying it would create a nuclear arms race on the Korean peninsula. Late last year, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un announced the strengthening of the country's nuclear program. Meanwhile, the US and South Korea will continue their joint military exercises next month. North Korea calls these drills preparations for an all-out invasion. Regarding the political situation in Thailand, Ms. Paetongtarn Shinawatra is a potential candidate for prime minister, when in recent polls, the 36-year-old female politician won the support of millions of people. Working-class people. Ms. Paetongtarn campaigned actively in rural areas. She promised that the Pheu Thai party of the Shinawatra clan would complete the unfinished programs that the former Prime Ministers Thaksin and Yingluck could not. "We want to show people that politics will change our lives," Ms. Paetongtarn told Reuters, "and only a stable politics can create a good life for the people." Recent polls show Ms. Paetongtarn ahead of her rival, incumbent Prime Minister Prayuth Chan-o-cha. According to Reuters, the Pheu Thai party is expected to win a majority of the vote, but it will find it difficult to lead the government as the Senate is still under the influence of the military and the House of Representatives is on the side of the Prime Minister. Prayuth. Elections in Southeast Asia's second-largest economy are in full swing. Ms. Paetongtarn said coups and power struggles have caused the Thai economy to go backwards. "I don't confront opposition groups," she said, "that only affects the country. Thailand has been delayed for too long. Therefore coups will not be allowed to happen again." An explosion tore through an Ohio metals plant on Monday, February 20th, scattering molten metal and debris that rained down on neighboring buildings and injuring at least 14 people, mostly with burns. The incident happened at the I. Schumann & Co. metal plant in Bedford, Northeast Ohio. Upon receiving the news, the functional forces quickly arrived at the scene and carried out rescue operations. Oakwood Fire Department Captain Brian DeRocco addressed the media on the scene, saying Alias 1 was in critical condition, and 1 was pulled from the debris. Representatives of the company, which produces copper, brass and bronze alloys, could not immediately be reached for comment. The business has operated since 1917, according to its website. The explosion was about 70 miles, 112 kilometers, northwest of East Palestine, Ohio, where earlier this month a train loaded with toxic chemicals derailed, causing a fire that sent a cloud of smoke over the town and forced thousands of people to evacuate. Another earthquake struck the border region of Turkey and Syria on Monday, February 20th, just 2 weeks after the area was devastated by a larger quake which killed more than 47,000 people and damaged or destroyed hundreds of thousands of homes. The European Mediterranean Seismological Center, EMSC, said Monday's quake, this time with a magnitude of 6.3, it struck at a depth of just 2 kilometers (1.2 miles), was centered near the southern Turkish city of Antakya and was felt in Syria, Egypt and Lebanon. According to local media, the new earthquake caused several buildings to collapse, killing at least 3 people and injuring more than 200. Meanwhile, the Turkish Emergency Response Agency urged people to stay away from coastal areas, due to concerns about the risk of sea level rise on the Mediterranean coast. Currently, the functional forces are urgently conducting search and rescue operations for those trapped under the rubble. A group of artists from Basra's Al Ghadir Studio for Fine Arts spent their weekends painting their depictions of the earthquake that hit Syria and Turkey on February 6, showing what the tragedy left in its wake. The exhibition was held along the Al-Farahidi Cultural Street in the Iraqi city of Basra. Visitors of the exhibition, which was set up along Basra's Al-Farahidi Cultural Street, watched the artists as they drew or painted scenes from the quake they watched or imagined, highlighting the loss that many experienced. Some have lost their homes and families, others have loved ones still trapped under the rubble. We shed light on these tragedies, and if possible, provide some assistance to these families or afflicted people. On February 6, two earthquakes of magnitude 7.7 and 7.6 on the Richter scale devastated a large area in southern Turkey and northern Syria. The combined death toll in Turkey and Syria stands at more than 47,000 people, and many people are still believed missing. Coming to international sports movement. Ladies and gentlemen, tennis player Novak Djokovic recently equaled the record of former female player Steffi Graf, reaching 377 weeks at the world number 1. According to the scoreboard released by ATP this week, Djokovic is number 1 with 7,070 points, 590 points, and 1,130 points more respectively than second-ranked Carlos Alcaraz and third-place Stefanos Tsitsipas. With 377 weeks leading the ATP table, Djokovic is far ahead of second-place Roger Federer, 310 weeks. If the rankings remain the same until next week, Noel will officially break the record for number 1 weeks in the world set by German legend Steffi Graf in March 1997. Djokovic is currently training in Belgrade, Serbia, to prepare for the Dubai Championship scheduled to open on February 27 in Dubai, UAE. Finally, come with us to Cologne, Germany to immerse yourself in the vibrant atmosphere of the Rose Monday Festival. This year the event returned to full activity after 2 years of hiatus due to COVID-19 and the conflict in Ukraine. Dressed in costumes and riding parade floats with political messages, carnival revelers delivered joy and sweets to delighted onlookers on Monday, February 20th. It's the 200th anniversary of the carnival celebration. I can't express how much joy there is to be here again, to be able to celebrate again. This is an amazing carnival here, just beautiful, and I am so happy. We are so excited and have been here since 6 in the morning to really experience this. Colorful, so wonderful, and finally happening again, always a joy. Next to costumed people throwing carnival sweets to the audiences, the political floats were another highlight of the parade. The Rose Monday Festival, also known as Rosenmontag, has long become one of the typical festivals in Germany that visitors cannot ignore.